Good morning, everyone. Give us just one more or 2 minutes just so that we can make sure that everyone who's planning on attending will attend. We'll be back soon. All right, let's get started. So, quick few items. First of all, if you want to go to the next slide, please. What is FSMA Friday? So, if you're new to FSMA Friday, welcome. And these are monthly FSMA related news updates, regulatory changes and updates, industry trends, and obviously a Q&A with the HSN Group at the end. And it's brought to you by the HSN Group and Safety Chain. Next slide, please. Okay, few housekeeping items. Only the panelist microphones are on. Ask your Q&A questions at the end or stop popping them in the chat. Our team will be monitoring and getting those to me so that I can ask them to Dr. Rice at the end. The recording will be shared, and if you're having audio issues, please use the call-in number. Now let's introduce today's presenter. Next slide, please. Welcome, Dr. Rice.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. So, Dr. Rice is a doctor in public health in epidemiology. He has substantial experience leading and managing laboratory operations and foodborne illnesses outbreak investigations. Prior to joining the HSN Group, Dr. Rice had led the FDA's Office of Regulatory Testing and Surveillance since 2017, with its primary function being the regulatory and compliance testing of human and animal food and supporting foodborne illness outbreak investigations. Dr. Rice was also a lab director for FDA for 2 years and the director of the New York State Food Laboratory for 11 years. In these positions, he developed and led comprehensive human and animal food safety laboratory programs and ensured accreditation to the internationally recognized ISO IEC 17025-27 quality standard. So yet again, we're very excited to have you today for the presentation, Dr. Rice. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, let's go through today's agenda. So first of all, Dr. Rice will share with us any recent regulatory updates. Then we'll move on to LAAF updates. And then Dr. Rice will go through a demo of the FDA dashboard. And then finally, we'll go through any key criteria to assess food testing lab. Over to you, Dr. Rice.
Thank you, Clemence.
Welcome.
All right. So for recent regulatory updates, very recent, on February 19th of this year, there was a rule in the Code of Federal Regulations that had been there for some time that when a method wasn't specifically specified, FDA and regulatory labs would default to the AOAC 1980 manual, which is quite old, obviously. And so I remember being part of the group in FDA that recommended taking this regulation off the books, and that was quite a few years ago. It went live just last week. And although it doesn't really change the way a lot of laboratories operate, it does remove one question about um, which method should be used, and it kind of opens the door or validates what laboratories are already doing, which is using more modern and technologically sophisticated methods for testing. But it validates what many laboratories are currently doing. And then fairly recently, in December of last year, the LAAF added a couple more analytes to the list of analytes, which I'll talk about more as we go forward in the presentation. Listeria monocytogenes was added, and then melamine and cyanuric acid was added to the list of analytes. The first analytes in the LAAF were a set of mycotoxins, which we'll take a look at here in a little bit. So as I put this presentation together, I had a kind of a focus on what the regulated industry would need to know about the LAAF, the lab accreditation rule for the analysis of foods. And so, this links back to the Food Safety Modernization Act, and this particular rule was several years in the making. Its focus is on the accuracy and reliability of certain very specific food testing, rooted in the Code of Federal Regulations. The final rule was on the books in December of 2021. It's a voluntary program, so it involves accrediting bodies and accredited labs. And it's completely voluntary as to who wants to opt in as an accrediting body to then assess laboratories and then accredit them. And it's completely voluntary as to which labs opt in to become one of the official vetted LAAF labs. FDA manages and oversees the program. When I was with FDA, directing the National Food Laboratory Program, there was a very, very competent team in my office that stood up the LAAF and managed that, developed the dashboard, which I'll demonstrate in a little bit. So they opened up the ability for accrediting bodies to apply to be an accrediting body in February of 2022. Fairly quickly, they had enough accrediting bodies there to go to the next stage, which was to begin accrediting labs with an ultimate goal of going live with the LAAF, which happened in May of 2020. Let's see, I can't see the date there, but the program went live with, there we go, 2024. Yep, and for just mycotoxins. Thank you. And so just kind of a structure of how this works. As I said, the FDA recognizes the accrediting bodies. They then assess and accredit laboratories for testing. And then that generates a list of laboratories that owners and consignees, manufacturers can then select if they need an LAAF lab. And in a little bit, I'll talk about when you would actually need to use an LAAF lab. Those labs then conduct the testing, submit food testing results and reports to FDA, who then review those reports and supporting documentation and either concurs or doesn't concur with the analyses. So there is a team at FDA that is reviewing these analyses and in a timely manner, with the understanding that these are imported products for the most part, and time is pretty valuable to the owner and these products. So the scope is pretty limited. It doesn't apply to all food testing. Its focus is on testing that involves maybe heightened food safety concerns. As the LAAF evolves, there'll be more and more analytes added to it, and it'll be a tool that can be used for a variety of situations, primarily with imported foods. It does not apply to surveillance testing or outbreak investigations. There's a whole nother laboratory testing program for that, but the LAAF is not part of that. And it will only apply to testing that's specifically outlined in the LAAF final rule. So the food testing is defined to include both food products and potentially the production environment. And its primarily focus is to remove food from an import alert, or to, if food is detained at a border or port of importation, this testing can be used to then free the detained product and allow it into commerce. So to be a participating lab in the LAAF, you must be accredited to ISO IEC 17025:2017. That's an accreditation standard that is focused on the quality and technical competency of a laboratory. It's a very robust standard, internationally recognized. All of the FDA food testing labs are accredited. Most of the state regulatory food testing labs are accredited to the standard. There's no requirement for the sampling entities to be accredited. So whoever is collecting the samples to be submitted to laboratories to be tested, they're not accredited, but FDA does pay attention to sampling qualifications and documentation, training experience, the sampling plans, and sample collection reports. So FDA does take a look at the integrity and validity of the samples that are being collected, as well as the analysis at the laboratory level. There are no defined list of suitable methods, but FDA can determine if a method is adequately validated or verified for use. And the ISO standard very specifically defines what is required to validate or verify a method and add it to the scope of accreditation. So these lab reports that the LAAF labs are generating, the FDA will review those reports. One of the first things they're going to do is just confirm that the method that was used to analyze the product was within that lab's scope of accreditation. And they'll take a look at the analytical packages. These are generally abbreviated packages with just the essential elements there. FDA may require a full analytical package if they don't feel they have all the information they need. And they might randomly audit laboratory packages. So the laboratories doing the testing, being accredited to ISO 17025, would have all the documentation in place, so there should never be an issue with pulling additional documentation if FDA were to request that. So as I mentioned, the analytes covered by the LAAF right now, initially it was a list of mycotoxins, and then quite recently melamine and cyanuric acid were added. If you remember, those were involved in a pretty interesting outbreak of illness in cats and dogs, linked back to these being introduced into whey proteins and other products to kind of boost the protein content in imported products. And then obviously Listeria monocytogenes is an important pathogen. So let's take a look at the LAAF dashboard. I wanted to share this with you all. So FDA created this really nifty tool for people who are in need of a LAAF lab to be able to find that lab. And so right now we've got this is a landing page. It's a pretty simple dashboard here. If you scroll down, the very first thing you'll see will be the analytes currently listed in LAAF that are required to be tested for if your product falls under the requirements of what needs to be tested through the LAAF. There's a lookup tool for import alerts that are relevant to the analytes. So for Listeria monocytogenes, and then they're listed here, melamine and cyanuric acid, and then the list of 5 mycotoxins, which were the first to be introduced to LAAF. And you'll see when capacity is reached, meaning there's enough laboratory capacity out there to support adding this analyte. The compliance date is 6 months later, so industry is given 6 months once we have sufficient capacity to begin adhering to the requirements of having samples tested if on import alert or detained and in need of an LAAF lab. This is a list of the accrediting bodies that accredit labs. Probably not something you need to be pay too much attention to, but there's a pretty robust list of accrediting bodies. If you want to look up a specific accrediting body, there's a lookup tool here, and you can type in the name, because that's particularly handy when you get to the list of labs. So these are the list of accredited labs, are in alphabetical order. If you're looking for a specific lab, you can again look it up in the lookup tool here. And what I think is really important is this next table is what's within the scope of accreditation. So if you need a lab to do Listeria cytogenes testing, you would want to find a lab here that specifically lists Listeria monocytogenes is within their scope of accreditation. You'll see some analytes listed here that aren't currently part of the LAAF table of analytes. That's because the goal is to expand the list of analytes that are listed at the beginning of the table here. It's like I lost my table. That's all right. So right now there's just a handful of analytes, but over time that list is going to grow. It might include pesticides. I know that there's an interest on adding Salmonella enteritidis to the shell egg program. And so as analytes are added, they'll be announced, and you can kind of track that. But if you're not aware, you can always go to the LAAF dashboard and look up and see which analytes are currently required based on the compliance date. So I think that's it for the dashboard. And so when must you use an LAAF lab? So again, import alerts, if you've got a product on import alert for the analytes that are listed in the LAAF, to get that product off an import alert, you would have to use one of the LAAF labs and then have that package reviewed by FDA and concurred upon. And product that is detained at a port of importation, again, that would be a situation where you might be required to use an LAAF lab. FDA has a process called directed orders, so FDA could step in and just decide that a specific product needs to be tested by an LAAF lab. But for the most part, it's going to be to take products off of import alert, at least now. As the program evolves, there'll be some domestic elements to it as well. So then I thought I'd transition today a little bit into key criteria. If you're a food manufacturer, beverage manufacturer, or importer or distributor, and you need a laboratory, I've been involved in laboratory assessments for quite some time and bringing laboratories into meeting the accreditation standard. And I thought it'd be valuable just to kind of give some very high level, what to look for if you're trying to pick a laboratory to support for any kind of testing even outside of LAAF. And so fundamentally, accreditation to ISO 17025, if the lab is accredited, it's going to have everything in place to ensure a high quality program, both as far as quality and technical competency goes. Want to make sure they have a program in place to assess and document analyst competency. So that would be participation in proficiency testing programs and successful performance, records on training to ensure that analysts are appropriately trained. Take a look at the number of corrective actions and preventive actions that are open, and really take a look at the min and max and average days to close out a kappa. They should be, for the most part, closed out relatively quickly. If you're seeing these open for 100, 200, 300 days, that's a red flag. Um, and the kappa process should drive continuous improvement in the laboratory. And that should be evident just by a review of the kappas that are currently open and closed and root cause analysis, and just that you see evidence of you know the lab using the kappa process. And then documentation, the ISO standard requires this, but some labs are better at this than others. There should be records on instrumentation, ensuring they have appropriate preventive maintenance and calibrations, all the temperatures are being monitored and within spec, and so on. Document control, especially for method SOPs, there should be a standard operating procedure for the methods that are being used, but they should be in kind of a locked format where the analysts can't make changes and so on. The ISO standard has requirements there that help verify that the methods that are being used exactly the same way by everyone who's performing the method. And then sample chain of custody, that could be more important to some than others, but you want to ensure that from the time that sample is collected, there's controls in place for who can access the sample or impact the sample, that it's maintained at an appropriate temperature and storage condition, that there's accountability for who has touched that sample, analyzed that sample, all the way to sample disposition and destruction. And you would want to make sure that there are staff dedicated to the quality program. Technical staff, analytical staff should not be managing the quality program. There should be some segregation there. You want to make sure the methods are verified and validated, and the ISO standard is very clear as to what it takes to sufficiently verify or validate a method. And so a verification on a method, that would be a previously validated method that was developed, say, by AOAC or some other major entity, and then a laboratory wants to adopt it, and they verify suitable performance through a verification process. A validated method would generally be one that a lab develops in-house, or maybe they have custom instrumentation parameters they want to use. And so there's a little bit more to validating a method as far as, um, generating the results that you intend to generate on a consistent basis and reliable basis. And procedures in place to detect quality issues like internal cross-contamination of samples. For example, there are phenotypically and genotypically labeled bacterial control organisms that they can be used to ensure that you're not accidentally contaminating a customer or client sample with the controls that you're using. There should be a good environmental monitoring program. So in food manufacturing, environmental monitoring programs are pretty routine and standard, but in laboratory environments, these should be there as well, looking for the pathogens that are being tested for. If they have a PCR, polymerase chain reaction, like screening assay, some labs test for amplicon contamination. So there should be a program in place to verify that the air is suitable, it's clean. That would be yeast, mold, or aerobic plate count. And then testing on a regular basis for the pathogens that are being tested for in that laboratory. And then they'll look for labs that participate in internal, external auditing programs. And there's some minimum standards in the ISO standard on this, but a robust quality program in a laboratory would embrace internal, external auditing and probably go above the minimum to make sure that their programs are audited and compliant with their internal policies and the ISO standard. So, when I'm taking a look at a lab and making recommendations for a customer or a client as to whether this is a good lab to use, I like to look at their internal and external auditing reports and assessment reports, take a look at how they handled the findings, the opportunities for improvement, any corrective actions that might have been put in place. Labs that are accredited to ISO 17025, the accrediting body is a third-party accreditor. They generate assessment reports. Labs are required to be assessed every 2 years, so you can take a look at those assessment reports and some of the findings that were there. And you really want a culture of quality. It's all about the process and not the person. And if get a sense that staff really embrace and operate under a robust quality system. And this is true in manufacturing, but it's also true in a laboratory environment. So I'm going to wrap up and then open up for questions. But one is, a key point I want for this presentation and the takeaway for you all is that the LAAF dashboard is there, and it's a one-stop shop for everything you need to know about the LAAF and where to find a servicing lab and what you need to test for potentially. So that list of analytes will continue to grow. It's slowly growing. Accreditation to ISO 17025 is foundational to the quality and technical competency of a food or beverage testing lab. And I would recommend, if you're looking for a laboratory to support you in any way, seek a lab that's accredited to ISO 17025. And if you are a manufacturer with an internal laboratory program that is not accredited, I would really recommend that you consider getting your lab accredited. It's not, I would call it, say, a super heavy lift. There is a lot of work, but in the end, labs that are accredited and have a robust quality system actually operate more efficiently, more effectively, and I see, the real savings as far as not only cost but time and effort through this process of continuous improvement.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Rice, for your presentation. I've learned one thing or two, or maybe more, and I hope the rest of the audience did too. So we're going to go through the Q&A now, and we received a few questions prior to the event. So the first question, how does this rule impact unaccredited in-house laboratories?
Yeah, so this rule does not impact those laboratories at all. It would impact, private laboratories. Most of the labs that are accredited under LAAF are private labs, but there's also some state and government labs listed there as well. But if you have an in-house laboratory, it doesn't impact you other than, if you're an importer or manufacturer, you would not be able to use that lab to meet the requirements of the LAAF. You would have to use an LAAF lab.
Thank you. Thank you. Question number 2. What actions and documentation would FDA want to see taken after receipt of Listeria SP positive result in your environmental program?
Sure. So FDA they'd want to see that there is like a preventive control program in place. So, obviously, if you have an environmental monitoring program, that's step number one. If you get a Listeria positive sample, it will partly depend on if you manufacture ready-to-eat products or not ready to eat. If they're ready-to-eat products, FDA is going to want to maybe be a little more focused on what your program is doing. But they're also going to want to see that you appropriately sanitize and clean the location where that sample was collected, and then did retesting and verify that that location was no longer positive. There's also zone 1, 2, and 3 sites. So if you're a ready-to-eat manufacturer, you would be testing zone 1, which are direct food contact sites. That would be definitely of pique FDA's interest. But zone 2 and zone 3 sites, if you get a positive and you clean and sanitize, you have records that that site is no longer positive. That's all they'd want to see.
Okay, thank you. And then another question. How do dietary supplements, specifically imported ingredients, fall into FSMA's accreditation rule? And does it fall under this rule, if at all?
Dietary supplements are not part of the LAAF rule, at least not yet. And I couldn't tell you for sure if they're where they would be in the list of priorities for commodities and analytes to bring in. But that might be coming. I really don't know.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that's all the questions we have, unless someone else has another question and wants to put it in the Q&A. Oh, I think we have one. All right, which I see. What imported products, oops, sorry, I had it and not anymore. Okay, what imported products needs to be tested at an LAAF lab? If product is tested by an accredited lab prior to import, does the import product still need to have LAAF testing?
So right now, the way the LAAF is operating is for the vast majority of situations would be an example would be FDA tests an imported product, say imported like fresh fruit or produce, and finds Listeria monocytogenes, puts that product in import alert. That importer would then have to use an LAAF lab to get 3 consecutive negative results on future product to be imported. The product that was originally positive could not be distributed in any way in the US, but if they wanted to import a similar product, if they're on import alert, they would need to use an LAAF lab to get off import alert. So the other part of that question was if the product had already been tested at an LAAF lab, that would tell me that it probably was sent to that lab because of an import alert, or maybe it was detained. And if FDA concurred on the results, then that you should be good. I mean, that FDA would provide guidance on what would be needed, if anything else.
Okay, thank you. It was very useful. And I think that was the only question, unless we have another one, maybe. Okay. Oh, I think we have a second one that just came up. How should, Dr. Rice, how should manufacturers communicate LAAF expectations to suppliers?
That's a good question. If your suppliers are foreign entities, I guess that's the main focus of the LAAF right now is, imported commodities and food products. I would expect that they would be aware of the LAAF, but I honestly don't know how to respond to that other than FDA has a communication channel for industry and they're pushing this information out. I think they do their best to make that information available, but there are some landing pages that people can visit just for updates and so on. Like I myself subscribe to a number of FDA updates, and that's kind of how I keep informed as to any changes or things I need to know.
Thank you. That's very useful. Yeah, subscribing to the FDA updates is very useful. Okay. Oh, looks like we have another one. Let me see. Okay, what are the biggest mistakes companies are making regarding LAAF? In your experience?
Well, I can't think of any major mistakes. I mean, it's all about, if you have a detained product or your product an import alert, the LAAF is your tool to get that product back in commerce or off the import alert. And so probably you would want to make sure that you have a good plan for sample collection, because that could be one hurdle. Is you get the samples in the LAAF lab and FDA deems that there is an issue with sample collection. So probably want to make sure that you're aware of what's required for that sample. And once it's in an LAAF lab, you're in good shape. That lab knows how to test it and will generate valid results that FDA will review. And if negative, there's a process for how you get something off import alert or out of detention.
Thank you. What scenarios create the highest enforcement risk?
This sounds a little bit outside of LAAF. So I'm very much in a laboratorian. So my role in most of my career has been standing up laboratory operations and support of the regulators in the field. So regulatory risk, I would say weakness, if you're a manufacturer anyway, weaknesses in your environmental monitoring program, having written SOPs, but not following those SOPs, especially where it surrounds, say breaches in the integrity of food being manufactured, or finding a positive in an environmental monitoring program not appropriately responding. So records and documentation, like if FDA inspects your facility and sees that what you have in writing looks good, but what you actually do doesn't follow that, that's going to be a red flag. And then, not having records. If you have an environmental monitoring program, you've got to have records available and that sort of thing. So that's what pops into my head just based on my experience working at FDA and now working as a consultant supporting food manufacturers.
Thank you. Got one more question. Are there capacity constraints with LAAF accredited labs, such as longer turnaround times or limited availability, that companies should be planning around?
I would say the answer to that would be no. I know that FDA really worked hard to establish enough capacity to meet industry's needs, and they're very cognizant of the need for quick turnaround times, both for testing and then reviewing the analytical report. So at this point, I would say there's no limitations for capacity for the analytes that are currently listed.
Thank you. And then if we look ahead, are there any upcoming expansions to which tests or food categories fall under the LAAF requirement?
Yep. So that list of analytes will expand, and it will eventually involve some of the domestic food that is produced. For example, I mentioned shell eggs and the shell egg program for Salmonella enteritidis. I know that's one that they're adding capacity to. Eventually it'll be listed. There's other analytes. I think pesticides are on the list. I don't actually know what the list of future analytes looks like and what the priorities are. That's something FDA sets and I think is based on risk assessments and may change over time. So as far as I'm aware, I don't know what's going to be next to be added, but stay tuned. It'll be on the dashboard.
Yes.
And you'll have six months to comply once it's on there. So
great. Well, thank you very much. The audience left comments that your presentation was very clear, very useful. And so we're going to wrap up now. We're so appreciative of your time, Dr. Rice. And then if we can go back to the presentation, please, team. Okay, so now for all of you attending, please take the benchmark survey and report. You'll also get access to the benchmark report as well. There's a $500 gift card drawing for those who actually go and help us answer some of these questions. Now let's talk about the FSMA Fridays that are coming up already. So next month, we have Don Cowter of the Atchison Group, who will be presenting on March 27th. and it will be on working with the FDA, practical insights from a former FDA official. And you can register today if you want. And then the following month, it'll be a discussion panel, and it'll happen on April 24th, same time, and it'll be on the FDA, FSMA, and AI, navigating regulation, data, and compliance intelligence. Again, this page is up, the registration page is up, so please go ahead and register. I'm looking forward to this panel conversation. Okay, now there are more resources for you out there. Dr. Rice mentioned the FDA dashboard, but you can also find some info on the Atchison's website. You can find some on Safety Chain's website under a resources section, and all of the former FSMA Fridays that we have are also on replay in that library as well. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us today and discuss the FSMA Labs accreditation rule. And I'm looking forward to having you all join us again in March. Bye, everyone.